Imagine realizing that the woman you built a family with, the mother of your children, wasn't just lying to you, but doing it with a smile on her face. And not only that, but her lover was a smug, married man who thought he'd never get caught. Most people would scream, argue, maybe even beg. But me, I played the long game. And by the time I was done, her affair partner lost his wife, his kids, his career, his house, and even his freedom. If you've ever dreamed of watching karma hit like a freight train, you're gonna love this story. So hit that like button, subscribe, and buckle up, because this is one of the most brutally satisfying revenge stories you'll hear all week. Way back in the early 2000s, I started to get the sense that something wasn't right with my wife. At that point, our kids were still very young, 4 and 6 years old. They were little, but not so little that they couldn't describe parts of their day. And they started mentioning more and more often that they had been staying at my wife's parents' house during the day. That alone wasn't strange, except for the fact that her parents lived about 90 minutes away from us. So the idea that she was going there 2 or 3 times a week, basically every day she wasn't scheduled at her part-time job, raised my eyebrows. It didn't sit right with me. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, denied anything unusual. But the problem was that she had never been a good liar. I could see through her. So I decided to be methodical. I began tracking the mileage on her car. After a few weeks, the numbers were undeniable. She was logging an extra 400 miles a week, sometimes more. That was no small amount of driving. At that point, I knew something was happening behind my back. Then came the big break. One day, I sat down at the family computer, and right there on the desk was a sticky note she had left behind, with her AOL password written on it. Couldn't resist. I logged in. Her inbox confirmed everything. I found email exchanges between her and her old college best friend. And in those emails, my wife openly talked about how she was regularly sleeping with one of her ex-boyfriends from high school. The details were blunt. She even joked with her friend about how this guy's wife had let herself go after having kids, mocking her weight gain. Reading that made me sick, but at the same time it gave me evidence. I printed out the emails and hid the copies. Even with that, I needed more. I wanted undeniable proof that would hold up against her lies. So I called up a friend of mine who was a police officer and explained the situation. He suggested I talk to a private investigator he knew who had left the force a few years earlier. That man's name was Ron. Ron was incredible. I paid him a retainer, handed over the emails, told him what little I knew about my wife's suspicious trips, and he went to work. A short time later, he came back with a full report that laid out everything. Photos, times, dates, addresses, all of it. The pattern was crystal clear. She would take our kids to her parents' house, drive off to meet this guy for lunch, and then the two of them would head over to a cheap motel for a few hours. Afterward, she'd pick up the kids and drive back home, acting like she had just spent the day with family. That was all I needed. I hired a divorce lawyer. Growing up, both of my parents cheated on each other, and the fallout from their toxic behavior had absolutely destroyed my siblings and me. I knew firsthand how devastating infidelity and betrayal could be on kids. It was unacceptable, and I wasn't about to let it poison my own children's future. But I wasn't done yet. I asked Ron to dig into this man she was cheating with, and he delivered. His name was Bob. He was married with 3 kids of his own. He worked as a vice president of sales at his father-in-law's business. On paper, he had it all: a wife, children, a steady career, a nice home. And yet he was sneaking around with my wife behind everyone's back. With that information, I had my lawyer draft the divorce papers. At the same time, I asked Ron to make a few extra copies of his investigation report. I had one more step in mind. On the very same day that my wife was served with divorce papers at her workplace, Ron met privately with Bob's wife. He showed her the evidence, all of it, photos, times, everything. She was devastated, but she had a right to know. She deserved the truth, and what she chose to do with that truth was entirely up to her. Now, while my wife's infidelity didn't make much difference in the legal process of our divorce, Bob's life completely collapsed. His wife hit him hard where it hurt. According to public court records, she drained their joint bank account, took the kids, and left him. When her father found out what Bob had been doing, he immediately fired him from the company. And since her parents also owned the house that Bob and his wife had been living in, he was kicked out of there too. Their divorce turned into an ugly disaster. Non-stop fighting both in court and outside of it. Things got physical as well. I later learned that Bob went back to the house one day and started arguing with his wife. The fight escalated until her brother stepped in and broke Bob's nose. Police were called. Reports were filed, restraining orders were issued. Over the next year, Bob faced more incidents, more police involvement, criminal charges, even some jail time. His life was reduced to ashes. These days, I can't find Bob anywhere online. From what I last heard, he packed up and left the state. Meanwhile, his ex-wife bounced back. She went to work for her father's company, and when he eventually retired, she stepped in and took over. As for me, my ex-wife and I kept things civil for the sake of the kids. I made it a point not to engage with her on anything outside of parenting. When our children grew up and became adults, I cut ties with her completely. I don't hate her, but I don't care about her either. The only reason she holds any significance in my world is because she's the mother of my kids. Nothing more, nothing less. So while my wife thought she was living her best life, sneaking off to a cheap motel with her high school flame, I was carefully laying the trap. And when it snapped shut, it crushed not only her illusion of secrecy, but his entire existence. The cheater lost his family, his job, his home, his dignity, and eventually, even his freedom. That's the thing about betrayal. You think you're playing a game, but sometimes you're just walking straight into checkmate. Cheating isn't just about broken vows. It's about disrespect, about carelessness with people's hearts and lives. And in this story, justice didn't just whisper, it roared. Sometimes karma just needs a little push. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell me in the comments. Do you think the revenge went too far or not far enough? And of course, subscribe for more stories where karma comes knocking harder than anyone expects.